Okay, I'm just going to get started. Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this very special session. My name is Layla Austin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Public Affairs Alliance of Iranian Americans, or PAAIA for short, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that serves the interests of the Iranian American community. It goes without saying that since September 16th, when 22-year-old Mahnaz Afkhami died at the hands of Iran's notorious morality police for allegedly violating the hijab law of the Islamic Republic, we have been witness to an extraordinary woman-led and male-supported movement, which with the slogan, "Woman, Life, Freedom," has sparked a revolution across Iran and a global solidarity movement calling for an end to the Islamic regime. Today, we are honored to be hosting two extraordinary Iranian American women leaders, Mahnaz Afkhami and Goli Ameri, to help us deepen our understanding of this incredibly brave, unprecedented woman-led revolutionary movement currently taking place in Iran. Our discussion today will revolve around Mahnaz Afkhami's beautifully comprehensive and nuanced, and I must say incredibly timely, new memoir, The Other Side of Silence, which recounts her journey from her leadership of the National Women's Organization of Iran in 1970s to later serving as the first Minister for Women's Affairs in Iran, where in her own words, she, quote, participated in or witnessed crucial life-changing moments in Iran's history from a unique vantage point, working with grassroots women in farms, factories, and schools, as well as working in the government and on legislation, end quote. After the revolution, Ms. Afkhami continued her critically important work in exile in the United States, where she founded and continues to lead the Women's Learning Partnership, a global partnership of 20 autonomous women's rights organizations in the Global South that promote women's leadership and human rights across 60 countries. I highly recommend this amazing memoir. Not only will you learn a lot about Iran's historic struggle for human rights and democracy, but Ms. Afkhami's story perfectly encompasses the modern history of Iran with all its contradictions, tragedies, and promise. We are putting the Amazon link in the chat, and I think it would make an excellent holiday gift. I really do recommend it. Here to help us navigate Ms. Afkhami's story and connect the historical context to current events in Iran, we are honored to have Goli Ameri with us today. Ms. Ameri is the CEO and co-founder of Startitup, an online advisory marketplace. In her previous role as U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, Ms. Ameri was responsible for the second largest bureau at the State Department, with responsibilities for the bulk of U.S. public diplomacy. She established the business case for expanding international people-to-people exchanges of the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, and established the first official public-private partnerships in the State Department. Ms. Ameri continues to be highly involved in advocacy efforts on behalf of the Iranian American community, and her endless commitment to public diplomacy is evidenced by her recent endowment of the Public Diplomacy Innovation Prize at USC's Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. We are delighted to have you both with us today for this important and timely discussion. Before I hand it over to Goli to start our discussion, I want to remind our audience that you can put your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to them later in the discussion. Goli Jan.
Thank you very much, Layla, and thank you to PAAIA for bringing us all here together today. Really appreciate all your efforts on behalf of the Iranian American community. And Mahnaz, it's such an honor to be here speaking to you. I just wanted to tell you that when you were doing all the incredible, amazing things that you were doing in Iran, I was a young teenager and really remembered so looking up to you and always thinking to myself that someday I also want to come back to Iran and become the minister of something. That something was not very clear at the time, but clearly you were really their role model. So it's really quite an honor to be here with you. Thank you. So I'm going to jump into our questions quickly because I know I have a lot of things that I want to ask you, and I'm sure our audience has many questions that they want to share with you. one of the things that I read about you in your book and subsequently in other places is that when you were 11 years old, your parents divorced and your mom decided to come to the United States to continue her studies. And then the children, the three of you, joined her a few years later. And I'm no worries. I'm going to keep asking my question, and then when you're ready, you can respond to them.
Thank you.
So I was thinking to myself that this is incredibly unusual for the time, because my assumption is that that's probably in the early 1950s. So tell us a little bit about that. And I want to know if that had an impact on you in terms of your role as a woman and as a feminist.
Thank you so much, first of all, Bodhijan, for your kind words, and also for being here in this conversation with me. And also, you would have been such a fantastic minister in Iran of our time. And inshallah, you will be finally again, so yes, all of us are products of the experiences we've had, and the people who have been around us, and especially the women who have been around us and have helped us develop our own concept of what it means to be a woman. My mother was one of the three first women who went to university in Iran, and she was very interested in learning and in education. And even though she came to marry my father, who had just come back from France and was educated, in a European context, but somehow the agricultural feudal lifestyle that my family had at that time didn't seem to suit her. She was very anxious to be fully independent and to learn more. So she got a divorce and came to the United States and took the night shift in a cannery, and so we started to work her way through college, and brought each one of her children to the United States, one each year, following each other. And we all were very much affected by the spirit of independence and learning that she cherished. She just passed it on to us.
You said she literally worked the evening shift at a cannery.
That's right.
And then she was able to bring her children here and raise them on their own.
Yes, she did that. And we all are a little bit different, weird, I think, because we're just used to not saying no to anything. If an opportunity comes up, we just grab it. And of course, for instance, my sister was 11 when she came to America, and she had her 11th birthday here, and she turned out to be, this was during the Vietnam War and all that, revolutionary spirit in America all over, and she became a Marxist, Of course, that was not necessarily something that would have fit our background, but we tried things that seemed to present themselves.
Right. Very interesting that you raised that. So, I think we've all heard or read that, behind every successful woman or man, for that matter, is their partner. And, that partnership has a lot to do with the level of success that any individual has. Tell us a little bit about your husband. What role did he play in your advancement in life?
Because I went to high school in the United States, and my background, how we have a whole long list of courses, 30 courses that we keep repeating in schools in Iran, the school here didn't quite figure out that I hadn't really completed every one of those fields. So I got graduated from high school at a very early age. I was barely 16. And I met my husband. We were family, so I knew about him, but I didn't know him. He was going to Berkeley, the university there, and he was very much into classical music, into philosophical treatises, into that kind of thing. And I was very impressed and soon in love. And that was not a time when we could live together or anything like that, or test something. So we decided to get married. So I was 18 when I got married. So I always say at this time of my life that I probably have been married for 100 years, because people usually work separately and then see each other at home in the evening. We almost always work together as well as live together. So I'm saying if it's 50 years, it's actually 100 years that we've been living together. And without his support and without his, enlightened kind of spirit, I'm not quite sure whether I could have accomplished what I was able to accomplish. And he's been a kindred soul and extremely helpful to me. I've learned a lot from him. Although I tell you one thing, he has learned more from me in terms of the poetry, especially the English poetry that I love so much. So I would read it to him constantly. He wouldn't read what he had in school to me or explain it too much. But I actually read these poems to him, and at first he was a little bit, not quite enthusiastic, but later he knows them by heart by now. So that was my big contribution to him, I think.
It's fascinating. So, you were the Secretary General of the Women's Organization, and then subsequently the Minister of Women's Affairs, the second in the world after Françoise Giroud of France. And during Prime Minister Almuzagar's time, you were the only female minister in that large all-male cabinet. Tell us a little bit about how that experience was and how you handled it, because I think for many of us that, maybe my age group and maybe a little younger that have worked here in the United States, I think we all also have our stories of working with male colleagues and male bosses. I just want to know what your experience at the time was with that cabinet.
Well, it was a very odd situation, not just for us and not just specifically for me, because I was very young and not very experienced and not even very good in about Iran itself. I didn't know it as well. But I think, and even let's say when there was this car, the official car that drove me into the Prime Ministry, for instance, the guard who was at the door usually saluted the ministers, But when it came to me and the car, he just didn't know what he was supposed to do with a woman minister. He just, got himself twisted into all kinds of some facsimile of a salute. To the person who brought sort of a report or something to hand to the head of a committee that was talking, and I would happen to be the head of that committee, he would look and see the oldest male, to hand that to. So there was a lot of stuff like that. And there's the other thing that I don't know whether this is the right time to say it, but all of the women ministers who came after, and I met them a lot outside Iran often, every one of us had a restroom story, because there just weren't women's rooms in the area, they were all men, so it was really quite a adventurous kind of a situation. But anyway, in terms of the serious matters, I think that the people that I had the good luck to work with were all very well educated, most of them outside of Iran for graduate school. They were all had expertise in the field that they followed, and they were very open-minded. But however, I can't say that they were feminists. The word didn't even exist at that time. But the thing that helped a lot, both because François Giroud, the French minister who was the first one, also didn't know what she was supposed to do, and we both shared in this, that this was an advantage in a way, because we kept saying something that later became a slogan, and that's all issues are women's issues. Because we didn't have a guidance, and there wasn't any precedent. We kept saying that, all issues are women's issues. And so when we had a special committee, and that was Prime Minister Hovedor who agreed to it, we had a special committee under his presidency to meet with the ministers of 12 ministries, from agriculture to war, to labor, to health, to all the others, so that they could talk about how the process of development includes both men and women. And every month I met with their senior vice presidents. So this was amazingly helpful. And some of the things that I've been so excited to share with my Iranian friends and colleagues, as well as with other women, is how useful that was, because there is no precedent about that ever anywhere, even 40 some years, nearly 50 years later. And this was so well conceived, And so even though it didn't come about the replication of a system, it was just learning by experience that this might work. It was so useful, and it made everything so much more easy. Again, it's not because these were feminists in our conceptual framework. It was the fact that modernity was accepted and development was accepted in the government.
So it doesn't sound like you had to expend a tremendous amount of energy in being taken seriously by your colleagues. Well, maybe some, but not.
Yeah, my good luck was that they were all, well, remember that there were 60,000 students in America alone doing university work and graduate work. So these were all educated, modernity-minded people.
Individuals.
So, yeah, but it took time to pick up pieces of what we had in mind. And I never forget that when we were, I was bringing the idea that women who have who are working and want to have leadership in their work, they need to have, like every woman actually, they need to have support of the government. Like for instance, they need long maternity leave, they need childcare on the premises, they need half-time work with full-time benefits up to the age of 3 of their children. And all of that was accepted. But I never forget that the Minister of Agriculture, who was Mr. Rouhani, who was a wonderful person, but a little bit conservative and so forth, he wasn't too much for this, And of course they were right, it's not easy if you make a part of the population of a ministry, half-time because some they have babies. You have to replace them with other workers, and it's difficult. But he said, okay, and then he said, of course, in the cabinet room, he said, well, I'm telling you, colleagues, that if we listen to the Minister of Women's Affairs, pretty soon she will have us try to check to every woman in Iran without even asking them to do it.
That's great. Okay, so let's move forward in time a little bit. One of the things that was really fascinating to me is that you were the official host to President and Mrs. Carter during his last visit to Iran, which essentially was before the 1979 revolution. Can you share some thoughts with us on how that experience was and what you did and how you saw the President and Mrs. Carter and just what the circumstances were?
President Carter sort of had the sudden, decision to come on New Year's Eve to Iran, and it was very unexpected, and we all were very pleased to have that visit. They were a very wonderful, charming couple. They were very complimentary to all of us, to Iran. I was one of their hosts, and basically the speech that President Carter gave on that evening, it is, and also the answer that he got from the Shah. This was something extraordinary. I think I would take a look at that just to see how things happen. It's interesting to look at historical event in that sense, because there is a line there that is often quoted. Iran is an island of stability, he said, in this troubled area, but that's a tiny piece of it. The rest of it, the compliments that he paid Iran, how advanced it was, how his friendship with the Shah, for instance, made him be the first person he went to if he wanted advice, and so forth. And then the Shah talking about how America had helped Iran at different points, from Mr. Jordan to others who had been there, helping with education, helping with development, and so forth. So that was New Year's Eve 1978. And then exactly 1 year and 2 weeks later, the revolution had succeeded, not quite succeeded, but enough to have the Shah leave Iran. So I want to say that when we study that, we have to realize that there was not anything that would have necessitated this kind of a horrific change within a 1 year period. I mean, there were things that people were uncomfortable with, or complaints like everywhere, but there was, the kind of thing where the president of the United States would state and these things about Iran, this positive kind of a report, and then a year and 2 weeks later, Mr. Khomeini enters Iran.
Do you feel that President Carter or his entourage or the U.S. Embassy in Iran were sufficiently aware of what was happening in Iran at the time? Did they really have feet on the ground in a way?
It's, they had there was some knowledge and understanding. There was a lot of cooperation. There was a lot of give and take between the two countries. But I think that sometimes it happens that in trying to figure out the problems that were being caused by the OPEC and by the price of oil and all of that on the one side, that made the economy in America sort of vulnerable. And then there was also the Soviet Union, the idea that I read this piece in I think it was Time magazine, I don't know, and it just shook me when I read it, that perhaps ribbon of green standing for Islam, around the Middle East, would be helpful to both American and global relationships. That is, seeing Islam or the Islamic government as a way of saving, keeping the Soviet Union away. So there was the fear of the Soviet Union and the extreme interest of the Soviet Union in influencing Iran. But, there are all kinds of other issues as well, I guess.
Right. So when you became the Minister of Women's Affairs, I think one of the first things that you did was you literally went on a listening tour all over Iran, I think maybe to 40 cities, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm very curious to hear from you. What are sort of some of the top line lessons that you learned from that listening tour? Because I think, as we all know, Iran is truly a land of contrast. And I think you've said at some point that Tabriz, for example, is very different than Bandar Abbas. So can you share what your thoughts were, what you learned from that listening tour?
There was amazing reaction. For one thing, this was the time that also a group of us from the women's organization went outside Iran to China, to India, to Soviet Union, different types of societies to learn from them as well. But what we learned from our own people was really amazing. Like, for instance, the one that really stays in my mind is the reaction we got from women who worked in factories, especially many of them were in textile factories. I remember in Isfahan, for instance, a woman who we started thinking among ourselves that, meaning the board and leaders of the women's organization, that the main reform that we want is legislative. We want the woman to have a right to divorce, to child custody, etc., that type of thing. And we kept asking the women this: would you like to have a right to divorce, or the various rights that we could ask? And she kept talking about how much she got paid, you know. And then we thought maybe it's disparity. So we said, how about your husband? How much does she get paid? But she said, both of us get 25 2 months. It's not enough an hour. And so that brought us to understanding that what women has the priority for women in Iran, for most of the population, is independence, which again I had confirmed by my mother as well, that we need independence. And for independence, we need to have education and to have economic independence. And so a lot of our programs were built around that. That is, centers that would provide education, literacy, as well as skills building, so that people could work and have a steady, self-sufficient kind of life. Because the woman told me, well, what's the use of me having a divorce if I have to leave my husband's home and go to my father's, you see? And so that's true. You know, if you need to be able to be, first of all, self-sufficient. And these are stories that came from some women, the same I heard in China, the same in Soviet Union and so forth, as well as India. But the thing that is important, it gave shape later to our theories and our ways of giving structure to our work at Women's Learning Partnership, for instance, to do this on a global level. It came from the experiments of Iran that led to an international organization. And the importance is that we're not thinking one formula for all. We're thinking everybody wants rights, but then you have to adjust it to the circumstances and priorities.
So let's, since we're talking about rights, let's fast forward a little bit to the current women's movement in Iran, because you have a very powerful sentence that, you know, the legal status of women in Iran now is the lowest that it's been, despite all of their accomplishment, which is, you know, women in Iran have a 96% literacy rate, and there are more college graduates in Iran who are women than there are men. I don't know exactly what the labor statistics are. I know that, you know, getting good jobs in Iran is not really easy for women, but I want to hear from you. You know, maybe you can elaborate on this statement that, you know, their legal status is the lowest that it's been despite all of their accomplishments. How do you view that?
Well, the problem is that the system under which they live doesn't allow for much creativity or much leadership by women. You know, the laws are almost unique in terms of their backwardness. There's hardly anywhere except maybe the Taliban in Afghanistan who can replicate the way women in Iran are being treated. They are brilliant because we learned again also then, and have it confirmed later, that once a human being gets aware of rights, when they become conscious of the rights they want, you can't take that back, you know. And these women were aware of their family, their grandparents, their what they wanted. So they have fought at every step, you know, and they've tried all that they can. Whatever doesn't have anything to do with legislation and with the government, they have succeeded. Creativity in every area, you know, education in every area, but they cannot really make it work in terms of their participation and leadership, because it is so closed and limited in terms of possibilities of change in law and in governmental support. We had it easy, you see, because tradition was respected, but modernity and development was highly valued. So you could argue that, you know, if you don't have women trained, let's say, in modern agriculture, well, you're going to have to bring men from Afghanistan or from the Gulf or somewhere else and train them. So why not do our own women, you know? So they listen to that. But if you have a country, a government, which is also unique in the world, the government we have now in Iran, there is no government under the sun who has a theology, you know, based government. No government, you know. I mean, we have government groups of religious entities who have a lot of power, and there is a sort of a conceptual connection between, let's say, the King of Morocco or the Queen of England being heads of their mosque or their churches, but they don't rule the government, you know. This is the only place in the world where you have actual clerics running a country, you know. And so it's obvious that it's not easy to handle that.
So, you know, I'd like to ask your perspective on Iranian women, because I've noticed that oftentimes when I speak to non-Iranian Americans, especially in gatherings, it's always surprising to them about the fact that this is such a strong women-led movement. And the perspective that I offer to them, I want to see what your thoughts are on that, is that, you know, the women's liberation movement that started in the 60s in the West happened in Iran at the same time. I mean, in many ways, you are a product of that, and you were our role model at the time. So our mothers wanted that. They raised my generation raised the next generation. And then you have the Gen Z now, who are the biggest nightmare of the Islamic Republic. And these are the young people that have been raised by all of these mothers that started wanting more out of life in the 60s. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's a correct perspective?
Absolutely. I think that's quite right, because they've been able to have education, and they have followed it, and they have got specialized, and they want more, and they know that they can get it. And what has happened, though, is that throughout this 40 years, especially the last 20 years, there have been occasions where they have been able to learn even more. And of course, we have to remember that without social connection, social networking and technology, it would have been impossible. This is based on technology, on being able to connect without having interventions for the most part. And that helps a great deal, because whatever we do here as their compatriots and diaspora in this country, they can have it at any moment. And we have also, my organization has also often brought groups of Iranians to be trained under safe circumstances. And until now, I wouldn't even talk, none of us talked about it because we didn't want to cause any further issues. But we've been supportive of them. We've brought them to connect with other activists and so forth. And they have brought their knowledge, and they have taken some of what our partners, for instance, are doing, like, for instance, in various fields of change. And so they have been able to use that to the best of their ability. I think a combination of having had their consciousness raised throughout the years, and I would go even further, before the 60s, when things were happening in the first education and then political participation, and then later more. Now, these women really were well trained on the one hand, and they were also knew through technology what was happening in the rest of the world for women, and they were able to communicate. Some of the people that we worked with, through the decades, unfortunately, also ended up in exiles, such as the rest of us. But nevertheless, there were enough there and constantly being added to who could take on the issues. The 1 million signatures, for instance, was.
I was just going to ask you about the one, because I think that is a very important step that, because of the current movement, we're not hearing about it enough. And I want you to talk about the contributions of that, not just to Arab Spring, but to the current movement in Iran right now.
Absolutely. Every step, even well, I don't want to get too far back, but the Iranian women, even at the time of the revolution, who went to the demonstrations, it wasn't that they wanted an Ayatollah as their, ruler. It was for more. The misinformation that was spread didn't allow them to see that this wasn't what they should want. And immediately, almost 2 weeks after the Ayatollah came, and the first thing that he did, he put the hijab and put nullified the family law. They went and had their first demonstration.
That's right.
Down. But then again, they tried to set up during Khatami, for instance, there was a little bit more leeway. Some thought reform is perhaps a way forward. But then they started the 1 million signatures, which was a brilliant kind of thing, because it had advocacy. The way here, for instance, in America, people run for office, they go door to door, they talk to people, they present writings. They did exactly that. They went there door to door to every house and tried to talk to the women that what they were seeking. And then, and they got so many women involved, in that movement. And then 1/3 of three men out of the people who signed, were 3 out of 10 were men, even then. So that whole thing was a huge lesson, not just for ourselves, but also globally, that you can't change things without men's participation. We can't, we are there for justice, for human security. We are not there to say, you've been mean to us, or some of you have been mean to us, or even a lot of you have been mean to us, so we're going to be mean to you. That's not what it is. We're moving for a better world, and we really have to work together.
We need the allyship of men. So if I understand correctly, your organization published a book on the 1 million signature campaign in Arabic and in Russian. Am I correct?
Yes, Arabic, Russian, French, and also the Persian, of course, was done by Mushin Ahmadi, who was one of the, with Parvin Ardalan, were the originators of the 1 million signatures idea. And then, of course, this led to the Green Movement. We all know about that, and that was more political. It was about the right to vote that was nullified, and that brought the whole idea of working with men to a different stage of closeness and unity. And I think these are the kinds of things that we hope that we can expand in other countries, because we really, at this moment in our lives, we have to think broader and larger, because the world needs the full participation of women beyond equality. Equality equality is fine, but being equal in a state that is hierarchical and dictatorial is no use. What we want is to go beyond that and think with men for a different way of living together.
Right. In fact, I want to ask you something about that. But before I do that, I want to encourage all of our listeners who are watching you to put some questions in the Q&A so that we can also ask some questions from you from the audience. I think in your book, one of the things that I found very fascinating was you speak of your life's passion of finding the ways and means of helping to change the architecture of human relations. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, you see, the more you work with people around the world at every level, you know, grassroots, factories, rural areas to higher ups, you see that the structures are very, very similar. Everywhere the man is the one who goes to work, the woman raises children. Everywhere the relationships sort of are shaped the same way. In some smaller sense, things have changed, but the overview is the same. I mean, some, of course, like the United States, have gone backwards. You know, we've gone from being one of the top to the 50th in terms of participation of women, and even some of the laws that have come about recently. So the thing that we need to do is to take on responsibility as half of the population that contains all of the other populations. We contain all of the disabled, all of the different races, languages, religions. Women contain all of those minorities. So we shouldn't go into silos and try to focus on smaller groups. You know, as women, we have to know that if we don't change the structure of top-down ambition and somewhat of a violence and also of lack of equality, unless we change that whole architecture of human relationships, which we can do with our male partners, we're going to go toward destruction. And unfortunately, whether we like to focus on it or not, it's there. Climate, pandemics, all these other wars, I mean, all over the place, people dying for nothing, you know. And unless we take our responsibilities a little bit more, a lot more seriously, and also a lot more holistically, not just for our own racial, our own minority issues or specific topics. We should really try to, because all of that can be solved if we work together and change the system, you know. And also when we raise our kids, remember, we're the ones who say, girls cross their legs and wear pink and are pretty, and boys are ambition and boys don't cry, you know. We have a role in this, you know. So I think it's Iran situation really has all of these characteristics, you know, and I think that it could be a global revolution that really maybe beyond anything that Iran hoped. It's really has all the ingredients for being that.
Right, and I think that in itself is a fascinating topic that I'd love to come back to. But let me ask you one other question before we go there. I think I've heard you talk about, you know, the role that unfortunately sometimes religion has played in holding women back, and I'm wondering if you want to address that a little bit.
Well, you know, unfortunately, it's not religion per se that has kept people back. It's that religion, like politics, like economics, like any one of these other fields, even the arts, can be mishandled and misused, you know. And religion has, you know, I mean, if you think of the monotheistic religions, they all came from the same part of the world where Iranians come from. And they all have wonderful statements of, treat your neighbor as you would treat yourself, love, togetherness, kindness, all of that is there. But then there are practices that belong to a different time or a different moment. And some of them exaggerated. I just tell you this quickly. I remember when we were talking about religion in my first organization in Iran that I organized was Association of University Women. This religious person who was supposed to be a reform person, one of my students asked him, is it true that if I wear nail polish, I can't pray? And he said, yes, if you wear nail polish, you can't pray. Your prayer is not counted. And it was preposterous. When in the time of the Quran, you think anybody had nail polish, or God had given a direction about whether you can have nail polish or not? This is nonsense, So a lot of these additions and changes that are made have nothing to do with religion per se. But of course, even in the arts, you used to have a man, very handsome one usually, slap a woman in a film, the artist, and Glenn Ford and Rita Hayworth in my time. And that was very interesting and attractive. But now, if you do something like that, it's preposterous. So the arts had it, all of them. It's the structure of human relationships, and religion is a part of it. There's nothing that doesn't allow us to understand and value whatever it is we want to believe, and we should be allowed to believe or not to believe, and to believe as we like.
Exactly. That's such a good point. It's interesting that you raised that about the movies, because at the beginning of COVID, I watched My Fair Lady again, which I remember adoring and loving when I was a younger child. And in watching it now, I'm thinking, oh my God, this this does not look good for women. I mean, I don't know what Hollywood was thinking, but anyway.
Things change, and you've got to adjust and change the structures,
Exactly. So we have some really good questions from our audience that I want to ask you. So one audience member is asking you, what can we do to get women in the West to be more active in amplifying this incredible women-led revolution in Iran? How do we create allyship?
One of the unfortunate things that we have in the United States is that we don't have a women's organization, a national women's organization as such. But there are organizations that deal with human rights, and there are organizations that deal with certain aspects of violence against women or issues like that. We should really try to get those organizations more involved. It's a little bit difficult right now because Ukraine has the central role. Iran and Afghanistan are nearly forgotten, but we can bring interest if we help do that. And then we could also try to see if we can, as Iranian Americans, if we could impact more the women who are progressive in Congress and in government, because they haven't played as big a role as others have. You can imagine the Parliament of France, for instance, has stood up in respecting the Iranian, demonstrators, and other Canada has done a lot. Others have done a lot, and we have to both advocate among women in human rights and in other organizations, and also the legislators and the government entities to do more.
Mm-hmm. In fact, U.S. Congress has had a resolution, actually, which was released by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in support of Iranian women. But I'm wondering, what your thought process are. I've been thinking rather quite a bit as of late about the fact that unfortunately, US policy on Iran has not been sufficiently bipartisan. And, I think the mullahs in many ways take advantage of the division between us here in this country. And certainly we know that the United States can be quite powerful in promoting, human rights and democracy. And I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
You mean the reaction to the government in Iran?
Yeah, as to whether bipartisanship might be more useful and more effective.
Of course, but that would be hugely more effective. It's actually for the safety and security of the democracy in this country. It's very important, as well as for outside. Definitely, that's a very important way to reach the goal of human security, both in this country, in Iran, and across the world. We should try to reintroduce dialogue. We have to, which it sort of reminds me to remind our participants, listeners, of the quote that my title comes from, Rumi's quote. Beyond all talk of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there.
Right.
And that field is the field of tolerance, of dialogue, of understanding, of listening to others with some sympathy and trying to hear what they're really saying. And the other side of silence is that field. And I hope we can all learn from Rumi.
Right. Thank you actually for explaining that. That's very profound. So one other question from our listeners is mainstream Western media outlets reported over the weekend incorrectly, they say, that the morality police had been abolished, and those claims were later dispelled by activists inside Iran. So how do we push for accurate coverage, and how do we stay accurately informed?
To encourage that tech connection is good, and that it continues for everyone, and try to identify accurate and activists inside who can connect with their friends and allies outside on a regular basis is very important. And encouraging this we're also encouraging in the case of Afghanistan, and the trying to get the voice of Iranian women reflected in editorials, in actual stories from them, from the insiders outside, because there are people who have connections with media, with newspapers and so forth. You hardly ever see op-eds or pieces by Iranian women who live in the country.
That's a very good point.
We can do something like that to get the stories out. And of course, the idea of the morality police being annulled is pipe dream, because that's one of the pillars of the Islamic Republic. That can't possibly happen. They may change their name or whatever. Even that they're not doing. But that's besides the point. But we should hear from women inside. And also, you were asking before, I think that the connection between the diaspora and the insiders in terms of advice and exchange of expertise among the high-level Iranians outside, like yourself. I mean, people who have extraordinary accomplishments in different fields. If we can have a good connection between those outside and those inside, it will help them when they hopefully get to the place where they have to participate in ruling the country, in working at the government. Then there will be the kind of thing that we're right now a little bit worried about. Some of us who worked in government are worried, okay, what if we succeed right now? What happens? You know, one step further is that what does our success mean? Who are going to be the groups who rule the country? And I think that the connection between diaspora and those inside is very important.
Do you think on that note, which actually is a very important topic, do you think on that note, does Iran have a structure to be able to take on that kind of a change? Then by structure, I mean an electoral structure, an administrative structure that can handle such a transition?
Well, it's very difficult to tell right now. I have a feeling that maybe it's just hopefulness that inside the government as is, even the Islamic Republic as such, there are people who are actually making the country run with faults, with difficulties, with horrible mistakes, but nevertheless, the government is functioning. In some areas, it's functioning well. In some universities, their graduates are taken outside, with great pride. So I'm thinking there are people who can't have a political role, but they have an administrative or managerial or working contribution in the government, which later, can contribute to a better government politically, but will not fall apart as a professional administrative system, So I hope those people are there, and I'm sure there are some of them who can't come out and politically object to the government, but they do have the know-how. And then, of course, if we can have outside-inside connection in a more, it sounds unusual, but then isn't this whole thing unusual? That's why we have to try things that are unusual and new, because this is a whole new revolution in the world. There's never been a revolution by women, and in which men have also participated. So maybe it will happen. I hope so anyway.
So, Mahnaz, we're getting to the tail end of this incredible conversation today with you, and I think I have one final question for you, which is a little philosophical. You've done so many amazing things in your life, and I think one of the things that I've so always admired about you is how humble and modest you are. And I want to know, how do you achieve that?
Well, thank you so much. I don't. Of course, I have to tell you something. One of the things that my editor did constantly was cross out so many the we's and put I. I crossed out and put we, because my whole life has been a matter of we. I mean, honestly, the amount that one learns if one is just open and greedy, and I'm always greedy. You can't imagine how, for instance, contacts with other people, all sorts of other people, can change the environment of an organization and also of a person. You yourself are like that, I think anybody who has a leadership role, it has to be by learning and sharing. It can't be otherwise. We can't just lead by reading books or following formulas. It's by people, interaction with people. And I'm following the rules, the rules of sharing and interaction.
Well, thank you so much for being such a great role model for us. And I want to know if you have any parting comments for our audience. And I see Layla's here with us too. If there's any advice that you have for us or any parting comments that you'd like to share with us.
Well, I've talked enough. I just want to share a wish. I really wish to heavens and to the people that we will be all able to go to our home country, and we will be able to see the beautiful Damavand and the beautiful city of Shiraz and the deserts in Kerman. Right now I'm shivering when I say that to you. I hope that the wonderful young women who are working so hard and hurting so much, that they will give us that opportunity to see them, to be with them, and to see our beautiful country.
Yeah, we are truly in awe of their courage, really, and I'm sure we all think about this every day. Leila, I'm going to hand it back over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to both of you. I want to thank you both for being a huge role model for me and all women, global women, and also Iranian Americans. Thank you for this incredibly dynamic and timely discussion. We really do learn a lot from the context that you provided about, to better understand the path of social change in Iran. Inshallah, next year in Iran, as they say, right? Thank you also, Mahnaz, for your fabulous memoir. It's really a pleasure. It's such a gift to us. And thank you for your hard work. And thanks to our audience for joining us. We wish you all a happy and healthy holiday season, and please stay in touch. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.